Welcome to another Kundalini After Dark session. I'm your host, Brent Spirit, and I'm here on Zoom. We've got 24 in the Zoom room. If you tuning in on YouTube as well, thank you all so much for being here tonight. If you're listening to the recording in the archive and you'd like to join us for the next live Kundalini After Dark session, you can check out the description to get the link to register, along with a bunch of other things available for you for free. We've got some other events, we've got some courses. Check it all out. You can also visit kundaliniawareness.org to find a directory of licensed mental health professionals with Kundalini awakening experience there to support you. As well, March 2026, we're hosting a live virtual Kundalini Shakti meditation. I'm going to try and get as many people as we possibly can all together at the same time to meditate with the same intention. All of us dealing with awakened Kundalini, very very powerful energy that we can use for healing, for transformation, for peace as well. So you can look forward to that. Tonight, we've got a handful of topics that the community has suggested we speak about. We'll talk a little bit about living authentically. The theme of reincarnation came up. What else here? Shamanic initiation came up. And we'll see where the conversation goes. I'll just ramble a little bit on these topics just to get the conversation started. And then I'm going to hand over the floor to anyone else that would like to join in the conversation. Maybe you've got some questions for the group, some responses to questions, some themes you'd like to share about. It's all welcome here. We meet together to let each other know that we're not alone, to keep each other company, to share ideas, resources, even to hold space for one another as we go through this challenging process. So no medical or professional counseling here tonight, no medical advice, we're just meeting as lay people to have a conversation about spirituality. Thank you all so much for your support, for your donations, for your engagement online, for being here with me. Let's see where our conversation goes. So Noemi in the Facebook group mentioned the topic of reincarnation, right? So sometimes people, have the theme of reincarnation comes up throughout the awakening process for some, but not for everybody. I've had some experiences that seem to suggest the validity of reincarnation, right? Some memories, apparent memories may arise as we go through our purification or purging process as, the subconscious or the material stored in our chakras or our psyche gets brought up to be released, to be dealt with, to be processed, to be healed. And sometimes things come up from the past, our childhood. It's very obvious, but sometimes things come up from apparently some other lifetime, right? It feels like a memory. It feels like something from the past, but it's not in this particular body. It's not in a place that we're familiar with. The time frame may look different in terms of the setting, so sometimes maybe I've had memories come up and I'm in Europe and it seems like I'm in the Middle Ages, things like this. And these memories that come up can be quite emotional. They can be sometimes traumatic. And they would seem to imply that something from previous lifetime is coming up to be released. Often those experiences that I've had some degree of spiritual themes involved, but no, not always necessary. I had one where I was apparently burying a loved one in the snow in the mountains. So these types of things come up. So maybe there was a lot of grief there that I have been carrying, and the memory comes up to be processed and released. I don't really know. It could also be something from the collective. We could also be grounded and rational and say, hey, I could just be, having a pretty far out imagination. But it seems that, this would suggest some degree of past life content being purged and released. The other themes around reincarnation, sometimes people wonder, I have nothing to do with spirituality. I was just doing my thing, grounded, rational, maybe even, living a materialistic in a materialistic way as maybe an atheist, for example. And suddenly I'm having this Kundalini awakening and going through a spiritual transformation and having religious experiences. What the heck is all that about? And so one may consider that if you've done a lot of spiritual work in a previous lifetime, then you may be, likely a candidate to have sudden, seemingly spontaneous awakening experiences taking place in this lifetime without necessarily engaging in a lot of spiritual practice. So that's not unheard of at all. Sometimes we may have particular callings or a particular affinity towards religious traditions that maybe we weren't brought up with, in our family of origin. So we may be drawn to particular traditions, Hinduism or Buddhism, for example, or shamanic traditions or indigenous spirituality, things like this. And we may wonder why. Why am I so drawn to it? Why does it feel so familiar and resonate with me? Why does it make sense to me? Why does it feel like going home or something that I've known from the past? Well, it could imply some previous lifetime work that you maybe have done with those particular traditions. So that can explain that a little bit. Um, there's so many ways of looking at it overall. I'll pause there because we'll go on to the next topic, but hopefully that sparks something in some. Maybe you've had some past life stuff come up that's pretty obvious and clear, and you'd like to share just to be heard and maybe to offer some validation and normalization to those who may be having these trippy experiences. Um, Galen here mentioned the topic of shamanic experiences, shamanic initiation versus Kundalini awakening. So I imagine, Galen, you'll have some more to share about this, but in my take on it is really, if you look at shamanism, it's like the oldest um, religion or spiritual tradition or system, right? Very, very old. I think it's all associated with this Kundalini process. It's just that, within some traditions, they use different language and models and symbols and paths to this unfolding, and they see it for different uses, right? So the yogis would see self-realization as the aim for this process. Well, perhaps some of the shamanic cultures don't see it as just to bring about some sort of enlightenment or self-realization, but actually as a way to better relate with reality and relate with, being human, being a spiritual being, relate with the energies, the archetypes, the nature, these types of things. And I think that's all valid. I think it can all fall under this umbrella, right? There's this idea of shamanic initiation or a shamanic sickness that can arise for people that are called to become a shaman. So they go through intense challenges, which can involve like intense sickness and whatnot. And of course, the idea of it being a shamanic initiation implies, that this is growth and lessons and transformation taking place. And we can equate that also with the Kundalini awakening process. We have these awakenings take place. It's very intense, and we can be initiated into these higher states of consciousness. Sometimes we come out with gifts of healing and intuition and access to all sorts of different information, similar to how a shaman would perhaps. So that's a fascinating theme there. And then Hugo mentioned the idea of, living authentically, living authentically. Let me see if I can find it. And Hugo, I'll invite you to share more on the call if you like as well. Living authentically and not reverting back to conditioned habits, right? Which has been a big, big thing. So with Kundalini, why do we feel we need to hide or simply just lie low on the radar when Shakti wants to burst through like a dormant volcano? Yeah, I think this is the work. So some will say that, the spiritual path or the spiritual practice actually begins after an awakening, not prior to. It's actually after an awakening that then the practice is absolutely necessary, right? And that's the practice of working through any of the momentum from our conditioned ways of being that we recognize are no longer valid, no longer serve, and yet still we tend to revert to them. And so the practice is staying conscious, being mindful, and trying to live our highest truths with our highest values as best as we can. And in doing so, of course, we exhaust some of the conditioning, some of the momentum there, right? But, why do we feel like we need to hide? I guess it's, there's this idea of, being afraid of our light, right? Being afraid of the unknown. We know what it's like to be small and, you know, just going along without any of this spiritual stuff. We know what that's like. We see other people doing it all the time. We know that it's familiar, it's safe, right? But to be on the leading edge of our evolution, to be on the leading edge of this collective ascension, to be going into unknown territory, right? It's pretty daunting. It's pretty scary. And so I think there's a natural inclination to want to just kind of shy away from it. Absolutely. Um, you know, fear of our light. Maybe also it's just there's some wiser part of us that knows take it slow before we like really like burst out into the world. Take it slow, ease into it, integrate, take our time, as opposed to having like some sort of ungrounded maybe not the right word, but like a sort of ungrounded manic explosion into the world, maybe there's part of us that says, let's take it slow. Let's take it easy and ease into this too. So perhaps that's something to consider. Lots of stuff coming up in the chat here. I'm going to pause there. We'll see if anything's coming up for anybody tonight, and we'll see where the conversation goes. Yeah, thank you all for being here. Let's hear from Deborah.
Hello.
Hey, Deborah.
One of the things that you just mentioned not triggered, reminded me of one of the reasons why I've stayed so much to myself about my own particular growth. That is isolation, retribution, rejection, um, harm, assault. All of those things are very real. And, without getting into a deep discourse on the nature of humanity, it's one of the reasons that I keep most of my own personal things pretty close to just myself and a few people. But I speak the things I share publicly for sure, and even with just people that seem to be coming into my life that are seeking some answers, I tend to put it into not necessarily code, but more like poetry. Um, Sometimes like metaphor, I suppose. But I have been downbeaten so many times by just being myself, and this happened way early in my life. Um, as different things would open up for myself, I wanted to share. It seems natural to want to share the joy and the awakening and the questions. And I've just learned no. I just I don't trust humans anymore, and I know that there is a bigger picture that is aware of that, and that's where my trust lies. And it sucks because there's so many consequences of this collective. Um, I don't want to say darkness, but this collective suffering that's so needless. Like, can you just imagine? I certainly can, of humanity just wanting to learn and open up and take care of one another, take care of our planet, welcoming the mysterious and the unknown. So I think that's all I really have to say. But it's just like, gosh, um, I can't wait for this life to get over with because I know my next incarnation is going to be it's going to be another journey, but I just can't bear what I have experienced so far and experiencing right now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Deborah, for sharing. I'm wondering if you relate to the idea, the theme of the witch wound.
Yes, somewhat. And it does go back to some of my own past life understandings. I do have some connections with some pretty vivid rememberings. And actually, just talking about that has brought a lot of questions and people walking away from me and whatever. Um, but yes, there has definitely been at least two or three lifetimes back where I led a very, very um, specific spiritual life, and I was definitely in like monastery type of situations. There's a very interesting resonance with another soul that I've traveled with in and out of different lifetimes, and um, I keep telling myself I gotta write this stuff down. But yes, I'm familiar with that. But I would love to hear your view on it and anyone else in our meeting tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. Yeah, you're not alone in this, you know, being attacked in some way or another in this lifetime or another lifetime for the light that you shine and the truth that you bring. Um, Karen's asking here in the chat, could you expand on that? The witch wound. Well, the witch wound is a term that seems to describe this general theme of women, powerful spiritual women, being burned at the stake, right, during the witch burnings, the witch trials. Um, you know. And I think that theme itself is, it's the same wound for, Christ being burned on the cross, not burned on the cross, but, crucified. It's the same thing, right? Who are you to shine your light and to speak these words and whatnot? It's threatening to people who, have maybe some vested interest in people not knowing who they are. So we were speaking about previous lifetimes. So I remember a lifetime being thrown in a dungeon and begging these guards, saying, "Please don't put me in that hole again. Please don't put me in that hole again." And when I came out of this meditation, this memory arose in a meditation. It was in the Middle Ages in Europe. It's the one I was referring to. I thought that word again. I was begging them, "Don't put me in the hole again." It's like I realized I was there before, probably for doing the same thing, which probably rambling about some spiritual stuff like I am right now. And they put me in the hole in some dungeon, and I was begging them, "Please don't do it." And that trauma, I think I still carry it to some degree. And maybe I'm trying to redeem myself or heal myself or keep doing my thing by, doing it here. Well, fortunately, I'm safe here. It's a very deep wound that many, many of us carry. I've met brilliant people with so much to share and to give that are terrified of what would happen if they really stepped into, and stepped out in the world and started to shine their light, despite, on paper, them actually being safe. But the residual fears from previous lifetimes it runs so deep. It runs so deep. It influences like all sorts of things in their life to this day. And so collectively together we come together. We can work to soothe one another and let each other know that we are safe here. And that's my idea. But by creating this space, we can open up and share. You can, you know, turn your camera off. You can use an alias. You can share as much or as little as you like. But if it can help a little bit to soothe that part, well, hopefully it can. Angelina wants to share here, so I'm going to ask Angelina to unmute. Yeah, and Blue Star shares coming out of the spiritual closet. Right, exactly. And that's a scary thing. It's a scary thing.
When I first had my Kundalini awakening, I I'm a very, very high extrovert, and I wound up sharing it with any number of people and ultimately found that certain people just walked away. And I had to grieve the passing of those relationships. I started before I could accept the fact that they walked away. I did something which one of my spiritual teachers called chasing the snake, which was somebody would find out what I was in the middle of and have a whole lot of questions and became very judgmental and decided that they were rejecting me. And I went after them with, "But you don't understand, but let me explain this, but this is real, but let me," and this is after having been bitten by that snake. And what she said to me was, "Well, you're chasing the snake, you're dying of the poison. So at some point, you stop chasing the snake and you stop trying to recover the relationships that you've lost, and you work on healing your own processes that need to be healed." I don't know if those people, and I've lost I've lost family members, I've lost friends, I've lost any number of people, but I'm have to be transparent. It's my nature to be transparent. And so I've been very direct about what I'm up to. And to some extent, I've made the road less hard because I've mourned the fact that those relationships are gone and mourned the passing of those relationships and have found that Shakti provides new relationships that are very loving and very embracing. And so, had those relationships not disappeared, I wouldn't have had room for the new relationships, which are very embracing. The biggest difficulty for me, at least personally, was that sense of loss of control because these people were leaving, and it was like, "But you don't understand. If you'd understand, you." And then I realized that, there's just so much you can do to help people understand, and then they don't, they let it go, and you let it go. But as I said, I am blessed from the perspective of new relationships have shown up that have I just, as I said, I would not have had time for. I still had all those old ones that were not helping me.
Incredible, Angelina. Thank you so much for sharing. It's very empowering and inspiring. And, you honored even the grief process. We have to grieve the loss of those relationships and feel those feelings. And through that, like you shared, it creates space
Yeah,
for something more.
yeah.
This has been my experience as well.
The other comment that I would make, because this is my first time joining the group, is um, I've been working with spiritual teachers. My Kundalini awakening was probably a year and a half ago, although I'm not convinced that I have had them throughout my lifetime, or at least spiritual Kundalini activations. But I find that my past life recollections come up when, in fact, I'm trying to purge a particular something that I'm in the middle of as it relates to a relationship. And that information about the past life helps me understand why I'm having such a difficult time resolving a current relationship. It recently came up for me in the past couple of months where I felt very, very tied to somebody that it was inappropriate for me to feel so tied to, and just could not understand what was happening. And through some past life work, I discovered that he and I had a very, very close, intimate relationship in a previous life. So I'm not just giving up his friendship in this lifetime, which I chose to do because it was an inappropriate friendship, but I was also giving up what was an intimate relationship from a previous lifetime that kept coming up for me. So I have found that past life work is very helpful in the processing of current things that need to be resolved or purged.
Brilliant examples. Thank you, Angelina. Yeah. Yeah, my awareness of what we may call previous lifetimes has also helped me to understand my work in this lifetime, to orient myself around my purpose and what am I here to do and what am I not really here to do and make sense of that as well. Yeah, fascinating stuff. Yeah, thanks for joining here and sharing.
Thank you.
Let's go over to Catherine here. So I'm going to prioritize those who want to share on the call. I see there's lots going on in the chat, but we'll prioritize those who want to share on the call.
Hi, Brent. Hi, everyone. Thanks for hosting. Yeah, this is such a rich topic. I have found for me, I've done a lot of past life regression work, some of it more fruitful than others. Sometimes I can really sink in and get stuff, but I found that if I'm in a dynamic that just feels more intense than the current situation, like logically accounts for, it's typically past life related. Like I had it come up with my aunt. I was like, why am I feeling like this much emotion? And I did a past life regression and I just saw so clearly this dynamic. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. Um, and I think for me at this point, I I feel very in touch with the fact that I've been a woman so many times, so many lifetimes, and that's just really kind of core and central to my healing. Um, and yeah, I think so for my healing process, it is a lot around healing from my father and my sister. I grew up in a domestic violence, pretty severe, and I've been away from it for a while, a long time. It's not ongoing. And my father's passed. And I found it really important to have safe spaces to do that work. So I do a lot of inner child work, which is just so much around self-love and a reclamation of the self. And I think the kind of the challenging part of Kundalini for me, because I get a lot of visitations from my father's spirit, is it's just like how confronting. Like I've just like almost had to see with adult fresh eyes like the patterns that I grew up with, and that's been, I mean, in one way it's incredibly liberating because there's clarity, but it's also like, oh, spiritual healing is not for the faint of heart. Like I just, like I've found like this is spiritual warrior work. But I had this kind of connection recently because my mentor, I mean, if she's in her 80s, she's amazing. She's just like I've got two mentors. This one who's still living, she's just amazed me. But if there's one thing that she's instilled in me over and over again is that I'm not a victim and that I chose this life. And I think victim consciousness is endemic to every human. Like every single person, has to heal through that. But I put together that it's when I can't understand that that's where like feelings of victimization come in because I can't see the full picture. I can't see where I'm going. I can't see the end result. And because I'm very conscious that when it comes up, I'm like, not a victim, not a victim, reorient. But yeah, I've just seen this Kundalini process is so much of not, not like nobody's going to hand me my sovereignty. It's mine to claim and step into. And that's really empowering. And it's also just so liberating not to expect it from unawakened. Particularly, I have a pattern of, like I'm still healing from that narcissistic wound and so I still am healing through some of that but not expecting an unhealed narcissist to say oh by the way you're amazing because that's just not going to happen so it's been a lot of me just standing in my own just standing in my own power and I think that's what the world needs. I think it's super empaths stepping up and just reclaiming the goodness in this world. And so, yeah, that's all I'd say. Thank you.
Yeah. Amen. Thank you. Yeah. Super empowering shares tonight. Yeah. I mean, like you were sharing, Catherine, you have to be like a spiritual warrior to do this work. And I think on some level, people recognize that when we talk about this, there is some truth there, but their defenses go up and say, I think you're crazy, when really they're like, actually, I don't have the energy right now to do that work. So I'm going to call you crazy and run away or push you away. I think on some level, people do know that this is a real thing. We all are living in the same spiritual reality. Um, but it takes a lot of courage to do this work, absolutely. And so yeah, like Bo shares here in the chat, I think Kundalini awakening is so far outside the context of most people's experience that there is a limit to what someone can understand who hasn't been through it. There is nothing to compare it to. It goes so far beyond the scope of what is considered possible in the normative, rational Western paradigm. And I think putting the expectation on people to accept, believe, or understand is probably unfair, but definitely makes it hard and isolating. Yeah, very grounded, balanced perspective there, Bo, and I agree. Like there's nothing that we can compare it to. We're, all going through this together and we barely know what the hell is going on, right? Like it's really out there. And yeah, expecting others to understand. Look, if they understood, they'd be here with us or they'd be doing their own spiritual practice too, right? It's um it's so out there. And so yeah, we have to step out of feeling like they victimized us and maybe try as best as we can to see a higher perspective. Yeah, like Catherine was sharing. Thank you. And Catherine adds here in the chat. And for me, spirit keeps showing up. It keeps validating my worth. And for that, I'm grateful. Looking for divine love first and foremost has been critical for me. Beautiful. Yeah. So for me, what I found through my journey was whatever I wanted from someone else, I had to double down on giving it to myself. So if I wanted someone else to see me, to accept me, to validate me, to hold me, to say I'm sorry, to apologize, I had to do all of that for myself all of that for myself. And there were parts of me that came up and said, why? That's not fair. They should do it for me. Why do I have to do this for myself? And it's completely valid to feel that way. But, life isn't necessarily fair. Sometimes we have to, you know, um, step up and do those things for ourselves because the other people can't do it for us. And what I found is when I did it for myself, I was relieved of any of the parts of me that wanted those people to do those things for me. And I found, oh, okay, I can do all of this for myself. That's interesting. So then I just went all in on self-love and self-care and self-acceptance, not saying, F you to the whole world and, I don't need you, but not showing up with this victimhood, right? I could still enjoy relating with people, but not expecting them to do the things for me that I can do for myself, right? Yeah, Olga shares here. I can't blame anyone for not believing. If I had experienced a Kundalini awakening, I would probably feel the same. Yeah, of course. I knew about Kundalini prior to this happening to me. I was involved in the spiritual community and I heard people talking about this. And I remember just scoffing at it and being like, these people have lost their minds. And now here we are. Let's see if anything else is coming up for anyone on the call. Red Pill Queen shares here. A giant white cobra licked my face in a dream. I was in a Tantra class. It was 6 years after my initial Kundalini awakening. Not sure what it meant. It was somewhat transparent. Very interesting. Yeah, all sorts of visionary experiences like this can come and go, right? The archetype, the symbol of the snake represents so much. It's been used around the world for so long to represent transformation, right, in so many different ways. So I guess sometimes those archetypes come through and they show up in our awareness. Let's hear from Tom.
Good evening. Somebody,
Hey, Tom.
a couple times people have mentioned the snake, particularly the cobra. And one of the oldest references that I can think of myself right now for that is the Epic of Gilgamesh, when he's finally swum to the bottom of the sea and plucked the plant of immortality. Gilgamesh comes out of the water and is so exhausted he lies down and falls asleep, and a snake comes and eats the plant, sheds its skin, and therefore gets eternal life. And Gilgamesh is left bereft and has to accept his human nature as his physical form is going to die. He doesn't seem to be too interested in his spiritual form. He was more interested in physical immortality because he was a third god. How do you become a third anything? But it's quite an interesting question. How does one become a one-third god? But anyhow, yeah. So the immortality is one thing that the snake also Victoria Day celebrations on the street. The other thing it signifies is well, immortality and Kundalini itself. So if you get bitten by or kissed by or licked by a serpent, it's a very good thing. Don't be afraid of them. Anyway, well, that's over. Did you all hear that? The fireworks. Anyhow, that's all.
Hey, thanks, Tom.
I hope people
No.
don't.
No, we didn't hear the fireworks, but I've been hearing them on my side too. It's
Okay.
Victoria Day weekend here. Yeah. Snakes. Yeah, thanks for letting us know some of those lesser known meanings of the snake. Yeah. Shiv is asking here about mental illness. How can we be so sure that we aren't just hallucinating these spiritual feelings? I think it's a valid question. How can we be so sure? So my take on it is, you know, whether this is hallucination or not, the things that, I share that we do are safe for everyone. right? Safe for everyone, regardless of whether we're all just making it up or not. If we are just making all this up, if we are just hallucinating, or if we are just all mentally ill, things I share, right? Just to take care of your body, to eat well, to focus on self-care, gentle mindfulness, gentle meditation on, the breath, to be in nature, to have some connection with a higher power, right? All very safe things, right? To pray, right? To study spiritual stuff if you feel like, whatever you feel like, right? So how can we be so sure? Well, some would say that we are are definitely um, not onto something valid or real here. And, we've been talking about them all day, right? Like all throughout the sessions, right? They're the ones who may ridicule and whatnot. And, we can give them we can extend a bit of understanding towards them, right? This is pretty far out stuff. But at the same time, so many of us are coming together and articulating ourselves so clearly and referencing, thousands of years of documented um, explanations of things that we are experiencing today that seem to imply that we're not just, we don't have something wrong with us. We're actually going through something valid that other people just haven't yet recognized, right? And there are some who haven't experienced this, who, for whatever reason, aren't closed-minded. So we can also just acknowledge them and appreciate them for a bit. Every now and then, sometimes we'll have somebody like that come into the community and say, hey, my family member, my partner, my friend is going through a Kundalini awakening. I want to better understand what they're going through so I can support them. But I'm not having those experiences myself. And whenever they show up, it's just like this great blessing. It's like, wow, somebody so understanding and open-hearted has shown up here just to try and understand with an open mind. And I think that's awesome. There's people like that. And Angelina shares in the chat here that she has a number of good friends who don't understand Kundalini awakening, but love and respect her. And so they're supportive rather than questioning. So we don't want to dismiss everybody that hasn't had this experience as a hater or a critic. Some people are genuinely open and curious, right? And, cherish those people.
In terms of the processing of witnessing, because somebody mentioned earlier in the chat, how do you not go back to old habits? Um, in reading the Bhagavad Gita extensively, it talks about the spiritual awakening only comes about with a powerful witnessing process, which means to move to the place where you are angry, but you are not the anger. You are the witness watching the anger. And all you need to do to change that anger is to watch it. I mean, the scientific evidence which says when you watch something, that thing changes is basically what happens with behavior. I teach a tool called the Enneagram, and with the Enneagram, you learn to move to a witness mentality. So you watch your compulsions and you watch your habits. And in that process of watching it, you change it. The first time you say, oh, isn't that funny? Every time she says A, I react with B. Let me watch that again. Look at that. She said A and I reacted with, oh yeah, there it is again. She said A and oh, he said A and I react with B. And eventually, rather than react with B, you become curious about the reaction. And in that space, this is the Frankl quote, in that space between stimulus and response is where your freedom is because you get to say, maybe I don't have to react like that. And then you're not going back to the old habits. The other thing that I would mention, because I had a spontaneous Kundalini awakening without having no idea what Kundalini was. But the first thing that I sent to everybody trying to explain what was going on with me was articles at the National Institute of Health that has done research on this and has extensive articles on what this is. And so I realized that at least some of the people that I wanted to talk to about it, I also sent them you sitting in the living room, Brent, and that was a tough one. That was a much harder sell. But the National
Understandable.
the National Institute of Health articles kind of helped people because uh, I'm a corporate type, and so I'm surrounded by a lot of a lot of right-brained people who are very analytical and very logical. And so when they saw an article, it was like, oh, she's not imagining this. There's actually research on this. But anyway, but as I
Yeah.
said, the reading I've done about moving to that witness place, the Enneagram is a tool for that. A good yoga practice is a tool for that. Centering prayer is a tool for that. Meditation. I mean, all of them are really just designed to move you to that place of witness so you're not acting out of compulsion. Or I think your advice is the best. You just lay in bed with a glass of water next to you on the night table and you don't do anything stupid. Because for a lot of months, I just hit that send button, not knowing what was wrong with me.
Thank you, Angelina. Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, hitting the send button on the angry text message to your childhood bully
Right,
or whatever, right? Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Huh. Not necessary. We can process it without needing to express and create a mess, right? And
Right.
yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah, there's plenty of good research and material out there that we can present our more rational uh friends and family with if necessary. What they do with it, of course, that'll be up to them. I appreciate that you may have shared some of my videos with people. There's a couple of my videos where, I showed up in like a hoodie.
Yeah.
And the reason I stopped just wearing my regular clothes and try to show up somewhat professional in, my little button-up shirts and whatever is just so that I look a little bit more presentable to the people who are already skeptical. It's just like one other thing that we can do, right? It's just like at least show up somewhat presentable so that they don't dismiss you right off the bat. Like, who's this kid in his room wearing a hoodie talking about like snakes going up your spine? Like, what's going on, right? So that's a little tip for anybody who wants to start sharing. Is just like, I don't know, wear some wear a button-up shirt like a normal corporate person. Yeah, thanks, Angelina. I see here Callie shares in the chat that I had a friend say bringing it up to others is like going to a sold out theater, and once the movie starts and it's all silent, you scream and end up looking crazy, getting kicked out and being judged. Yeah. So to let others learn to grow at their own pace that works for their specific journey here. If they're struggling or ask, I'll share my knowledge. But if they aren't aware of any higher spiritual perspectives, I've realized it isn't my place to wake or enlighten anyone. They will get there when it's their time. What a balanced, mature approach, right? I think there's a period I definitely went through it, and I could probably still go through it, where we get a little overzealous, right? This is so incredible. We find, this can really resolve people's suffering. Let's share it with everybody. And of course, we'll get a bit of credit because we get to be the ones who shared it with them. So why not, right? So we want to stand up in the movie theater and tell everybody, right? But then, of course, there's a lot of backlash very quickly, and we learn hopefully very quickly that this isn't the right approach. And then we land somewhere where Callie is right now, where we say, hey, yeah, I'm open and willing to share if people approach me, but otherwise, I'm going to honor them, honor their journey and where they're at, and I'm not going to try and shove any of this down their throat. And then that perspective relieves us of any frustration around people not understanding us, right? Dipali shares here, I found that some people can relate to it when I call it a dark night of the soul as a way of explaining versus trying to explain what Kundalini feels like. Oh, that's a great tip. Yeah, the term dark night of the soul um, is much more broader and a lot of people can kind of relate with that. Whether they are going through a quote unquote, spiritual transformation through the dark night of the soul, or it just happens to be a rough time in their life where things get a little intense. Yeah, they can relate and they can kind of understand what we're going through. That's a great tip. Yeah. Brilliant. Let's hear from Blue Star.
Hey there, how's everybody?
Hey, doing well. How are you?
Um, so I had my awakening about, I would say about 30 years ago, and I'm still coming out of the spiritual closet. Um, from what I experienced, it was um, so fantastical, and and part of the trigger was past life experiences started coming up, and I found that triggered um, was one of the aspects that triggered my awakening. I had found a book of high magic in a bookstore, and I had started doing the rituals in the book, and it triggered my Kundalini awakening. And but the one particular past life, bits and pieces of it would bubble up to the surface over many years, and it took me about 20 years for it to resolve. And for me, I found that I would experience what I would call a karmic convergence, which is I was working on transforming a particular theme of this lifetime, and then the past life would come up that also had the same theme. So that's for me, it became the past life experiences became like a karmic intersection of what was happening to me in this time frame. And but for me, I feel like that the power that we experience in our awakenings is also related to uh, how many times we've had Kundalini awakenings in previous lifetimes. So if it, and it also depends, I feel like, on our energetic awareness and our perception of the inner world. So, if we've had, like, say, 7 previous Kundalini awakenings in another lifetime, the power of this one and the spiritual recapitulation can be so profound. And for me, uh, I had I guess, a mix of different traditions in my awakening. I had the bottom up, which took me to Shiva, and then I had a top down, which was Christian. And at the time, I was neo-pagan, and to have the experience of emerging into Christian mysticism, um, basically pretty much almost broke me because I live outside of Nashville, Tennessee, in the belt buckle of the Bible Belt, and I have a knee-jerk reaction to Christianity. And so uh, when I awoke on my journey, I began to I awoke onto the path of the intuitive Kabbalist and was treading the path of the lightning bolt. And it was not something that I sought out, it was just something that happened. And then it took me into Christian mysticism and the experiences of what was happening in the New Testament. So, uh, and it's still ongoing after all these years. So for me, it's just like I said, part of the work is accepting, uh, coming out of the spiritual closet. And I feel like, the Kundalini awakening, the Holy Spirit awakening, it's the beginning, of the great spiritual detox. And a major portion of that is learning how to transform our group karma that we've experienced in the past lifetimes of the persecution. And with a Kundalini awakening, people, you mention it to them, and then there seems to be great experiences of persecution and our victimhood. So, yeah, so I feel like transforming our group karma of persecution, our group karma of oftentimes we were, sacrificed for religious reasons in other lifetimes, or experienced betrayal from religious leaders. I think that's all part of our group experience, which is, this is further up the path for many of us when you have the awakening. We're on the the professional path, the the path of recapitulation. So for me, I'm still coming to terms with the Christian mystical experiences that I've experienced, and the Kabbalistic experiences. And I feel like in the Bible, we have the tree of life, and then we have the tree of knowledge. The tree of knowledge is the Western tradition, the path of the lightning bolt on the tree of life. And yeah, so the the mixed symbolism for me, I would like to see more of that. Anyway, so thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, coming out of the spiritual closet. I can relate around the theme of Christianity. So I was raised Catholic. Then I moved away from that in my teenage years and never really um, revisited it too much. But I've had some notable, mystical experiences with Christ. And after one of them, the first thought I had was, oh shit, I'm gonna become an evangelical um standing on the sidewalk like preacher guy. Because that's how powerful the experience was. I was like, this is the next logical step. I have to share this with everybody. It was like a split second little thing that came up for me. And I had to kind of chew on that for a bit. But eventually it of course, settled, and it was just a really beautiful experience. And I could see the validity there in those that are drawn to Christ and the work of Christ, the energies of Christ, and want to share it as well. I can understand and appreciate that a little bit more. Um, yeah, and of course, I've had experiences and I'm drawn to traditions all around the world. So, um, I appreciate it all, but I can relate with you there. How do we kind of make sense of this? And Angelina shares here in the chat, there's some wonderful writing about how there's a belief that many of the women Christian mystics had Kundalini awakenings. There's a book on Christianity and Kundalini awakening by a well thought of Christian writer. Yeah, if you could find the title for that, that would be great, Angelina. I know that if you, I haven't heard this, I haven't looked into her process myself, but I did hear the other day that Saint Teresa of Avila, if you look at her process, it seems to be akin to Kundalini awakening process, just of course described with different language. And it makes sense. I mean, this process, transforms the entire system and brings you towards God. Like the way that I see it, it's at the center of all religious or spiritual traditions and experiences. It's just, we use different language and symbols, which is natural, of course, to do so.
Well, more of the work that I have done and is, as far as coming into our authentic self and our authentic service. Um, so on different occasions, I experienced demonic possession, and fortunately, I've had very good teachers who were able to help me liberate myself. And so now, living in the belt buckle of the Bible Belt, I work as an energy healer. And I have two clients basically that come to see me, people that are in the middle of a spiritual crises or emerging into their Kundalini experiences. And then the other people that come to see me are basically people who are in need of an exorcism. For, I call it next level spiritual clearing. So yeah, so for me, I never thought of myself, as a spiritual healer or, anything of that nature, but that's where my journey has brought me. And it's just been really gratifying, to be able to be a guide and support people, especially folks that I work a lot with many people who have suffered through Bible abuse and toxic Christianity. So, yeah, so being a Christian mystic and being able to support these people who want to awaken and transcend, the religion into spirituality, it's just been a great blessing for me. And yeah, and thank you for what you do, Brent. I really appreciate this forum.
Oh, thank you. You're so welcome. Thank you all for being here, and thanks for sharing, Blue Star. And Angelina shares the title of that book. It's called The Kundalini Process, A Christian Perspective by Philip Saint Romain. Yeah, Philip's brilliant, brilliant. He's got a handful of books out and decades of experience with Kundalini awakening as well. Yeah. Hey, Flush Jackson. See you there in the chat on YouTube. Thanks for being here. The Jackal, see you as well. Richard sharing here about some mystical phenomena, seeing colors, traveling through a rainbow tunnel. Yeah, interesting stuff. Interesting stuff. It seems like we all, at some point or another, not all, but maybe most of us will have some trippy experiences like this. Of course, nothing to become attached to or to seek out, but if they come, it's interesting. Yeah, thanks for sharing.
Some reference material for those people who are interested in Christian mysticism. You might want to learn something about the Cathars or the Albigensians, they're also called, who lived in the south of France, Provence, places like that during the Middle Ages, and against whom the King of France and the Pope led a huge crusade and managed to, it was vicious, and a very, very, very long war against them, with no holds barred when it came to tormenting each other in various ways. But they're fascinating because it appears from my readings that they gave Shaktipat, and which is, they had a belief, if I get this right, I hope I get this right, that you had, I think it was 7 chances to reincarnate, and if you didn't agree at the in one of those that you were ready to leave Earth, you'd be stuck here forever reincarnating forever into a human form. That was their belief. I think, and it's a kind of a weird one, but they're well worth investigating, because they would mock the Catholic priests or cardinals who were sent to convert them or to bring them back to the Catholic fold, Roman Catholic fold, and because these guys had no power whatsoever, but the Cathars and their wise ones, elders, they did, and which is Kundalini. The other book, if you're interested in that kind of thing, is The Pagan Christ by Tom Harper, who traces back the Christ in Christianity back to its much older forms, which are very much the same. Anyway, I think you'd all really enjoy that one, because it has to do with the passage of time and the sun, the rebirth, Christmas of the sun, etc., etc. Yeah, I won't linger there, but yeah, Tom Harper, Pagan Christ is good. Thank you.
Fascinating. Thank you for sharing. Can you please also type those groups that you mentioned, the Cathars, and there's one other. Just if you could type that in the chat.
Sure.
Sovereign Power asks here, Brent, have you or anyone else collected a bibliography of all published peer-reviewed scientific journal articles on Kundalini? I've come across many from 2017 to 2024 that are truly informative. I have not. That would be an excellent resource uh, for us all to contribute to, put together. I think maybe even, if we can use ChatGPT to help us define and source those, that would be great. Yeah. Hey, okay. You've given me some homework. Thanks, man. Got enough homework. But yeah, that's something we can definitely organize. Yeah, that'd be great. Okay. Let's hear from Amanda.
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yeah, welcome.
Okay, great. Thanks. This is my first Zoom meeting like this, so I'm like adjusting to the amount of energy that is experiencing right now. But yeah, I guess I have a question related to the quality of people's past life experiences. I had only one night where I experienced like almost like cartoonishly um scary, like needles and like just like all of the worst things, to the point where I was like, I don't know if this is a part of like I guess if it's more of like a psychic imprint and less of a literal like experiences that happened. um and I have kind of just let that go, and like I don't need to know or comprehend everything. But I just am curious now, talking to people, like, what do those memories feel like memories from this life, or like what is the experience of that?
Mhm. Yeah, thanks for sharing, and I'll invite others to share as well. Um, Similar to you, like you're describing, just like sort of like really uncomfortable, sort of dark scenes, general themes, like you mentioned, needles and things, scary things like that. So on a retreat at one point, I was in a really deep state with, access to, an infinite intelligence in a very direct way. And so I got a little curious and I said, tell me about my previous lifetimes. And I just hear back very dismissant, if that's the word, I don't know, dismissive, flippant type of answer, response. Ah, don't worry, the past is the past, not important. And I said, no, I want to know. Tell me about my previous lifetimes. Oh, not important. Just be here now. Not important. Not important. So I pushed. No, I really want to know. And suddenly I was, I was in a vision, in a scene of just like really dark, like how you're describing was like a dungeon. There's like lightning and thunder, and it's damp and cold and scary. And I just hear two words, three words, horrors and calamities. And I said, okay, I got it. That's enough. I've seen enough. I don't need to see anymore. I understand. There's a reason that we don't remember all of this stuff, right? There's a reason. It's we're protected from all that pain and trauma because we've done it all. We've been through it all. Anything that you can imagine, it's, you've experienced it in the past. And so maybe sometimes that general vibe comes up, like when you describe this sort of experience, Amanda, it reminds me of this like general vibe of just darkness, discomfort, fear, discomfort. And so perhaps it just comes up for us to just kind of just practice equanimity with it and to release it, and so that it no longer weighs us down a little bit, um, a little bit less, maybe. I know that there are some who remember very vividly, like details of their previous lifetimes. Some they may develop the psychic ability of walking around and seeing other people's previous lifetimes very clearly. It's like a normal, everyday part of the way that they move and function in the world. For others, it may come in glimpses, dreams, little feelings, little inklings. For me, it's been very sporadic and whatnot, but the things I've had have been carefully given to me to provide context for my mission. It seems, at least for myself, I don't really experience many things that aren't relevant to what I'm really meant to do here. And so the things that I have seen in previous lifetimes have been detailed enough just for whatever I need to know about moving forward in this lifetime. But if others have different experiences of past life awareness and they'd like to share, please let us know. And not everybody experiences this stuff. And of course, like I was sharing in the beginning, we could just be not actually having past life stuff. We could just be having a really good imagination, and we can, you know, entertain that possibility as well, right? Thank you all so much for joining tonight. What I'm thinking is we'll wrap up and then I'll play a bit of music. And if anyone wants to stick around, I'm going to be on the call, just kind of sitting in this energy field that we've created. It's pretty powerful tonight. I don't know if others are feeling it. I think I saw in the chat some others were mentioning it. And we'll connect again Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern for Shakti Hour if you'd like to join us solely to sit in the field together, to meditate, to go into whatever spontaneous movements, kriyas, to do yoga, to chant, to even have it on in the background as you do what you got to do in the world. And Monday, the next meeting will be Monday, 2 p.m. Eastern. If you'd like to meet for a Q&A session, I'll be on Zoom. The links I'll type in the chat here. The links will also be in the description if you are tuning in on YouTube. Thank you all so much for tonight. This was a really powerful call. So many great shares and great topics. It's always a good time. If you'd like to join the Facebook group, we've got the link there. Thank you all so much for your donations. I really appreciate it. If you'd like to meet with me one-on-one, I've got some openings on my calendar, and we'll connect again soon. Yeah, yeah. Others are feeling the vibes here tonight. So I'll play some music and we'll just kind of settle in here if you like. Otherwise, you can take off and do your thing. Thank you all so much for another great session. Take care, everyone. Much love. Much love.